Now the pastor will come up once again to pass on questions. We have more and more of them, and to be sure they're understood in the first place and then treated adequately.
We haven't had an occasion of anyone wanting to burn a new version in quite some time, as far as I know. Although someone wanted to burn the Reader's Digest Bible, or thought it ought to be burned, perhaps.
I think if society would permit it, we'd see more of it. We have made this much improvement, though. In Tyndale's day, they burned the translator. In modern times, they burn the translation.
I think that is an improvement, all right.
Now we just cremate people in the press, as we talk about them.
But in a way, Graham, I can understand the frustration of a person who says, wouldn't it be better to get rid of all these versions? It's so confusing. Why are there so many? I go down to the religious bookstore and I say, well, I'd like to buy a Bible. And it's not that simple. They say, well, now, what version do you want? How do you answer this problem of confusion that's created by all these versions?
It's a pity that such a blessing is perceived as a confusion. I think a lot depends on how much one knows about the source of the Bible. If it had been written in our language, maybe one version would be enough. But when you look at the Greek and the Hebrew and the Aramaic, you realize that the same phrase can be translated in different ways. Like, be ye therefore perfect, in Matthew 5:48. Now, is that a command or is it a promise? You cannot tell from the Greek. And it's very difficult to bring the ambiguity over into English. And this is where Goodspeed showed himself such a master. His English translation is, you are to be perfect. Do you understand? You're to be perfect. Wonderful promise. You will be perfect. You are to be perfect. But most versions will show it either one way or the other. So in view of the difficulty of bringing ambiguity over, I don't want to read one version that will give me only one possibility. I want to get all the possibilities that are available.
But I noticed you spoke of Goodspeed as that you sometimes thought that was your favorite.
Yeah.
But that almost speaks of a bit of frustration on your part, saying, well, right today this one is my favorite, but tomorrow it may not be. How do you, well, which one is the most trustworthy and reliable?
Well, that one's 61 years old now. It's simply incredible that Goodspeed has held up so well. By the way, he did the New Testament, he did the Apocrypha, he did not do the Old. In the Chicago Bible, a group of others under Dr. Smith did the Old. That's why it's called the Smith-Goodspeed Bible sometimes. Which is my favorite? Which is best, you mean?
Yeah, which can I really trust?
It all depends what I want to use it for.
I was going to get my pen out and write it down. This is the final word by a New Testament scholar.
Well, when I get home tonight, if I want to put my feet up and read something inspiring, it's still difficult to beat Phillips. Absolutely marvelous. But now if I want to, I'll be doing my Sabbath school lesson late tonight to get ready for the morning. And of course I'll have the original out in front of me, but using versions, I'll probably be using the Revised Standard much of the time. It's proved to be, though it was burned in 1952, it's proved to be one of the most precise, conservative, safe English translations ever.
Can I throw in a question just out of my own wondering? Do you think that a group translation, a committee translation, maybe is a little more reliable than an individual?
Oh, that's a very useful question. It may be a little more dull. For example, when the Revised Standard Version was being prepared, they always had to have a 2/3 vote before they would arrive at a decision. Often Goodspeed, who was on the committee, and so was Moffat, they would disagree with the 2/3 vote. So when it was all over, Goodspeed wrote a book, Problems in Bible Translation, to list the 100 or so places where he was voted down. And it's very exciting reading. So if you have an individual, he has a little more freedom. So an individual translation, in spots may be, more correct. Because they had to arrive at a compromise to carry the 2/3 vote. You know, textbooks written by committees aren't as exciting as books written by an individual.
Yeah, they lose their personal flavor.
Exactly. So I like all kinds.
Well, I can't help but wonder if maybe we all need to learn Hebrew and Greek, and are you ready to start teaching us classes? Is that really the only real answer to the problem, if we could read it in the original for ourselves?
Well, I like to say to medical and dental and nursing students that I hope they won't spend as much time studying Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek as I have, because when I come with a pain somewhere, I do not wish a disquisition on the biblical languages. I want help. So let them study their specialty, let me study mine. And I go to them when I need help, and they're welcome to phone me when they need help on the biblical languages. This is a time for specialization. I think because of the existence of these wonderful translations, it isn't necessary for most people to study the languages. But there ought to be somebody in the community that you could phone when a technical problem arises.
But you're saying then that the multiplicity of versions in a way is a real strength.
That's where the safety is. I wouldn't want just one. Sometimes I have almost my whole 150 out on the floor.
I have heard the question raised, and someone here may have it in their minds as well. Isn't it true that theological positions held by translators many times will be reflected in the translations? And that, well, for example, in the Roman Catholic Bible, someone asked about the Ten Commandments. Aren't they different aren't there a different number, and don't they read differently?
Yeah, I've noticed many assume that surely at least the Decalogue would be changed by our Roman Catholic friends. On the contrary, in fact, Catholic translations are very precise. Some of the best are of Roman Catholic origin. It's true, when they first translated the Bible into English in the Rems Due, there wasn't concern that it be understood. Well, if the Mass was still in Latin, why have the Bible in clear English? And so the Rems Due reads like this, where we're used to powers in heavens above and power on the earth and power beneath the earth. Powers celestial, powers terrestrial, powers infernal, which would stir some preachers, I'm sure.
It's sort of poetic.
Yes, but hardly in the interest of clarity.
Yeah.
So now, as the years have gone by, Catholic translations have become clearer and clearer. They're some of the very best. Jerusalem is very readable. The New American, not New English is Protestant. New American, very readable.
Now, that's not the New American Standard.
No, that's yet another one.
Oh, all right.
And then the Kleist and Lilly. Now, maybe this would show how candid and dependable these versions are. In Romans 6, where there's reference to being buried in baptism, there's a footnote by these two Jesuit scholars at the bottom. Paul is obviously alluding here to the early Christian custom of baptism by immersion. The descent into the water is suggestive of descent into the grave. The ascent from the water is suggestive of resurrection to newness of life. Want to write a better note than that? That's by these two Monsignors, Kleist and Lilly. So the Ten Commandments read exactly the same. Now, they count them differently, as you know. The Sabbath commandment is number 3. So when we say, what's your position on the 4th commandment, you'll be surprised by the response. But they're not the only ones. Lutherans and others count the Sabbath as number 3 and split the 10th one into 2, 9 and 10.
But if one's reading down through the text,
no problem.
Gets the whole message.
They weren't numbered in the beginning anyway.
Graham, you referred in your presentation to paraphrases and to the Living Bible, and there's been considerable controversy over that, whether a paraphrase really is a real Bible sort of thing. What would you say about paraphrases? You've used them in our Bible reference sheet, I notice. Are they trustworthy?
Well, in the first place, there's no way to translate without paraphrasing. So there's some paraphrase in every single translation, unless you want to go for a word-for-word literal, as in those 3 places where I have the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek.
Oh, yes.
You notice how lame that is with the words out of order? Now, you can buy books that are called interlinears, or diaglots, they're called. In fact, sometimes our Jehovah's Witness friends will come to the door with an interlinear or a diaglot, and you take it word for word. Have you ever tried to translate French into English word for word? It doesn't make sense. So all translations are somewhat paraphrase, a rephrasing. It depends how far you go. And Dr. Taylor,
he goes
deliberately,
further.
yes, he went a long way. In fact, sometimes he'll expand a sentence into a whole paragraph. There's no way you could reproduce the original languages from the Living Bible. Now, you almost could with Goodspeed. That's what's so amazing. His is readable American idiom without multiplying words. And yet, as Taylor paraphrases, which means that when he's right, he's clearly and brilliantly right. And when he's wrong, in my opinion, he's very clearly wrong. The thing is, he's clear.
But clear wrong.
Let me give a right one, and I'll skip the wrong ones.
Right.
You take Psalm 121:1. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. That's beautiful in Loma Linda when the valley looks across to the mountains and the snow is there. Very inspiring. I look at them every morning. But in the Bible, what the psalmist was referring to was the fertility cults up there. And Hosea talks about the leaders of Israel going up into those mountains to sacrifice with the cult prostitutes. And Israel was forever lifting its eyes to the hills and remembering what was going on and going up to those groves and engaging in immorality. And so the 121st Psalm says rather in the Hebrew, "Shall I lift up mine eyes unto the hills? Never. My help comes from the Lord." So Dr. Taylor paraphrases, "Shall I look to the mountain gods for help? Never. I will look to the God who created the mountains." I say he's brilliantly right, though it's a rather free paraphrase. I wouldn't be afraid to use living, but in the interest of precision, I'd want to have some of these others alongside.
Now, when I go into a Bible store, religious bookstore, and I ask for a Bible, I notice Bibles that are advertised as helping me with a lot of explanatory notes. What about that kind of thing?
Well, some are helpful and some are not. And
these notes aren't inspired necessarily?
The notes aren't, the headings aren't. Even in the Song of Solomon, where it says Christ's love for the church, that's an old tradition, but it's not inspired. I think it helps to know the history of these marginal notes through the years. And that's why I'm rather in favor of leaving the text pure and unadulterated, so I can make up my own mind. I mentioned Tyndale putting in notes. There's an extraordinary one in about 1549 in a printing of the Matthew's Bible, the comment on Peter that wives should obey their husbands in all things. Well, in the margin of this Bible, which has lots of helpful notes, it says, "Yes, it is the duty of the husband to beat the fear of the Lord into his wife that she may learn to obey." Now,
where can I get that version?
Well, I was thinking our church has done so much on marriage and the family and divorce. I was wondering if we should adopt this as our official version, you see, one remedy. But can you see how a marginal note has no business getting into it? There are many Bibles with helpful margins, so long as we realize they did not come with the same inspiration, and we read them carefully.
I've wondered, someone might well be asking, does your church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, have an official version?
I think some have rather wished so, but it speaks well of our worldwide outlook that we say we cannot limit ourselves. We've gone on record this way. We wish to share the picture of God with every person under heaven in all the languages of earth, so how can we have one official translation? There's only one thing that could be official, and that's the original, the Hebrew, the Aramaic, and the Greek, from which all translations come ultimately. But we're prepared to go to the world in any version, any translation. And that's why I like to relax when I'm in someone else's home and say, "Which Bible do you have there? Let's use yours."
Well, when you referred to these various versions, that does lead to another question, though. If I heard you rightly, we do not have any of the original copy, the original words that the prophet Isaiah wrote. We have copies of an earlier. And in these manuscripts, you spoke about the various variations. In other words, one manuscript will have a different word, perhaps, or a different reading. What I'm wondering is, are any Christian beliefs, is the picture of God affected by these variations? How can you know that maybe if you had another manuscript, which would be the original, not just a translation, that you might have a different or a distorted picture of God? What about all these variations?
It's very interesting to list all of them and see how relatively few there are, and then look at some of the most colorful ones. And since you mentioned, first you said Christian belief, and then you said picture of God, which I like, because the number one Christian belief is the picture of God. So let me pick an illustration that does reflect on the picture of God. In this 20-pound Bible, in John 5, verses 3 and 4, it tells the story that from time to time, God would look out over the parapets of heaven and see that a large crowd of sick people had gathered around the pool of Bethesda. Or is it Bethsaida? Or is it Bethsatha? They don't know what the name is for sure. Anyway, it had 5 porches. And every once in a while, the water would move. Now, what caused it to move? Now, the way the story is told in here, it would appear that God would look out over the parapets of heaven, see the crowd there, and call over his angel and say, "It's worth going down again. Go down, stir up the water. And remember, the first one in is healed." And this went on for years and years and years. And finally, an angel said to God, God, we've been watching a man there struggling for 38 years to get in, and we angels are so sorry for him. Could we bend the rule this once? Could we heal him? Because there's no way he's going to get in. And God says, you know I never change. First man in is healed. I never did like that story, and I was so relieved to start learning Greek in 1938 and discover that the idea that an angel stirred the water is a legend that crept in later on. The early manuscripts say the water moved, and it probably was assumed that an angel did it. Probably, though, it was drainage from the temple area, or a spring, or eddies of air moving. But that legend eventually crept into the text. Look in the early manuscripts, and you have a magnificent story there. These superstitious people thought an angel stirred the water, and the first one in would be healed. The real truth was that on a Sabbath afternoon, God walked by, and the man looked up and saw the kindest face he'd ever seen. And the kind face said, would you like to be well? He said, I surely would. And that kind face did not berate the man for squandering his health in youthful self-indulgence. He simply said, then pick up your little mat and go home, and you will be well. That's the real picture of God.
So that story appears in a manuscript, however.
That's right, later on.
But here a study of the manuscripts is important.
Very much so.
So that perhaps our more recent versions, which have taken that study quite seriously, or based upon that study, would be
They
more
tend
reliable.
to be based on the earlier manuscripts. But there isn't a long list of these. I picked
How
out a
many are
colorful
there?
one. There are very few. And we could get along without every one of these things, that, like losing the angel stirring the water. Fine, it's better without. There's a Trinity text in 1 John 5, 7, and 8 that has no support in the manuscripts. I never did think it was the best way to support the Trinity anyway. We can do it from the Gospel of John and elsewhere, much better. So there is no hazard of loss here by going back and comparing all these hundreds and thousands of manuscripts.
By taking the total picture, then,
That's it.
We're not going to be in any danger of getting the distortion.
It's looking at here a little and there a little that we always get into trouble.
You've mentioned the apocryphal books, the Old Testament, some of the New Testament. I'm under the impression that in the New Testament, our New Testament here, there are some quotations from Old Testament apocrypha. What about that?
Well, there are some interesting similarities. Whether they're quotations or not would be something else. In Jude, it mentions that, remember Michael the archangel came down to resurrect Moses, and Satan argued about it. That story is told in some detail in the Assumption of Moses, which is an apocryphal, pseudepigraphical book. Of course, if the story was true, you have a common source for it being told in several places. A clearer one would be the other reference in Jude, where it says, Enoch the seventh from Adam predicted the Lord would come with 10,000 of his saints. That is in the pseudepigraphical apocryphal book of Enoch. Of course, if Enoch said that stunning thing before the flood, the Lord is coming with 10,000 of his saints, that was told over many a back fence. And those memorable words found their place into the apocryphal book and also into the book of Jude.
So then you're saying that if something is in the apocrypha, that does not necessarily mean that it's automatically wrong. Totally
By no
false.
means. In fact, I
that's
could
very
give you a long
interesting.
list of things in the Apocrypha which were quite evidently true. John was cast into a cauldron of boiling oil and survived. Peter was crucified upside down. Many other stories. Isaiah was sawn in half in a hollow log. That's in the martyrdom of Isaiah.
And yet your
Newspapers have some truth in them too from time to time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's right. But I was interested in what you said about a reading of the entire work and the distinction you see between the 66
Yes.
and all of these pseudepigraphical.
That's the word,
Is that the word?
pseudepigraphical.
I made
Falsely entitled.
All right, and then the apocryphal.
Well, the story of Jesus playing with one of his friends, and the boy either threw a stone and hit him, one manuscript says, another says he bumped Jesus, and Jesus in anger turned and cursed his playmate, and he died. And the parents of the little boy who was dead came to Joseph and Mary and said, please, remove yourselves from this community. We do not want this violent child living among us. Jesus? I could tell you dozens more like that. That's the New Testament Apocrypha.
Here's a card that came in last week that just wants to thank you. Thank you for answering my question on why we are still here after 2,000
good.
years. I really appreciated that.
If folk feel we haven't answered the question, Tell them to send it in again.
All right.
And make it more
Good
pointed.
idea.
That would be fine.
Here's one that I thought was a good one that we need clarification on. You say that it takes over 1 year to go through the Bible study, and that you've done it 100 times. Now, how is this possible? Are you over 100 years old?
May feel that way sometimes. Well, it's like when Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am, and they said, you're not yet 50. The thing is, I've done it from 1 to 5 times per year.
Oh, there.
This year, 4 times. Last
Right.
year, 5 times.
Well, we're reassured then.
The mathematics is all right.
Here's someone that wanted to know, could we have a printing in our church bulletins of the places and times where you are actually doing that this year? I think you mentioned a place. How many places are you involved with this year?
4 right now. 3 are with students. But most particularly in a church, we're doing it in the brand new West Covina church to celebrate their opening each Wednesday night.
You know, we are thinking about it here. You and I were talking earlier today that perhaps we could schedule something like this for the fall right here in Loma Linda, and that many who have been attending and others could follow through here. And I know you've done it in the past, Graham, but it'd be nice for some of us who've come more recently to be able to go through it again.
Yeah, we've done it twice in this room. Each time it took 2 years because we skipped the summer.
Well, our time flits by here. Let's take this one. You spoke about sanctification. Now we're shifting gears a bit. What is this? If we sincerely accept Jesus as our Savior, how can we ever be lost? Once we are saved, aren't we always saved?
Yeah, that would suggest a rather legal understanding of what went wrong. But if what went wrong is that we began to distrust and we became rebellious and we left, as it were, we not only want to be set right, but we want to be kept right, kept in that relationship of love and trust and admiration and willingness to listen. But I could be set right and I could be kept right for a while, but I am still free to leave. And that's why I understand Paul said that having preached to others, I discipline myself very closely, lest having preached to others, I myself should be disqualified. I mean, the very essence of the truth about God is that He values nothing higher than our freedom, which means that 1,000,000 years down the line, I'll still be free to go.
A little 11-year-old, maybe it's a big 11-year-old, wrote in, why are there so many views of who God is? Could you comment on that in about 30 seconds?
30 seconds. Why so many views? You couldn't list them in 30 seconds. I think it comes from many sources. One is from reading the Bible, here a little and there a little, and not taking it as a whole. Another is, of course, we might all view God a little differently, legitimately, but also the influence of the adversary behind the scenes. But I think among people who really want to know God, one of the greatest sources of divergence here is that we each have our collection of littles. I have my text, you have your texts. If we take the Bible as a whole, there'd be more possibility we'd come into that unity that's inherent in our faith and our knowledge of the Son of God. And that's our goal these 20 Fridays.
All right. I've come into the possession of a little book entitled You Can Trust the Bible by A. Graham Maxwell. You know of this book?
Familiar with it, yeah.
This is a 1983 reprinting, and the University Church would like to make available a copy of this book for those who may be watching our television rebroadcast of this or who are listening on the radio. And we invite them to write to the University Church, Loma Linda, California, 92354.
Right.
And we'll see that they get a copy. We'll say a word more about this to our congregation here this evening in just a moment. Very interesting book. It expands on some of the things that you've talked about this evening.
Now, there wasn't time really to say much about any of these, but in there's a little more.
Just a quick word, Graham, about next Friday night.
Well, the next question is, if we have a reliable record of the evidence, can we be confident that we correctly understand the meaning? This is getting more important each time.
All right, we'll look for you next Friday night to follow that important message.